Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I want to revisit a video that we made earlier this offseason, just a couple days actually, after the season concluded in Tennessee. And that is our mock offseason for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And in this, we went over coaching changes, we went over what we would do with the current roster, who we'd cut, who we'd trade, who we would sign free agency, and we even did a draft. Now, the focus is going to be a little different today because we're not going to talk as much about coaching. That's been decided. There's nothing we can do about it at this point. I think the only conversation really would be adding an EVP, and you guys already know where I stand on that. I would add one, as long as you have a good candidate out there. But I want to revisit the roster. I want to revisit some of the big decisions, and I want to show you guys a little more detail as well on where the Jaguars sit in terms of some crucial salary cap numbers. Some different things like average per year. How much money is pushed down the road that these players have already earned for previous seasons? It gives you an idea of how much has really been pushed to a later date. How much cap hell are we in as a team? That's all important stuff. And so I want to talk about that a little more. But most importantly, I have had a change in mind of what I would like to see happen this offseason. And I do not think this will happen. I am very doubtful of it. I think that the Jaguars are going to go a very different direction because this staff is obviously going to be encouraged to do everything they can to put together the absolute best team this year, even if that costs them a little bit in the future. And that's unfortunately the circumstances we're in because we have a team that we don't trust. We have a front office we don't trust more so, that is still calling the shots with its job on the line. And you know how it's going to end, but you still got to watch. And so it's frustrating, but this is all hypothetical. This is just, what would I do? How would I build this team? All that important stuff. So I wanted to revisit this. And what's really changed my mind is looking at how the Jaguars compare to their division rivals. Not including Tennessee in this, right? Because Tennessee is really early in their rebuild. For all we know, sure, they could just magically go 13-4 this next year. I mean, that's usually how things work for us, but their team needs a lot of work. We're talking about the Texans and we're talking about the Colts. And what's changed my mind is comparing the situations for these teams. Right now, if you're looking at the talent, it is very similar. I think Jacksonville may have an edge, but the record would say otherwise. Houston outperformed us. They went 10-7. We matched Indy, despite sweeping them twice very early in the season. We finished the year 1-5. This was a team on downward trajectory at the end of the year, while the other teams were on the rise still. You look at the resources that these teams have, what they have to lose in players. Jacksonville has less money to spend, and they have more things to lose because they have Josh Allen and Calvin Ridley on the market right now as it stands. It is a bad situation. You are fighting a battle that you're losing, where you are outgunned, you have more firepower coming from your enemies, and something has to change in the way you're doing things. And we all know that, right? But most likely, probably going to get a bit of the same stuff. Really good early pick, bad use of late picks, hit and miss in free agency, or just nothing at all, and the team underperforms. But, we'll see. We'll have a little bit of hope, but that's kind of what I expect. And so I think something needs to change in the way the Jaguars build. And it's been said in the building, it's been acted out very poorly, but what needs to happen is this team needs to become a draft and develop team, not a free agency team. Not one that has to go spend on huge players to have a chance. They need to be in a situation where they're the ones getting comp picks consistently. They're the ones who are re-signing their own players instead of watching them hit the market or just looking at who else is out there that the Jaguars didn't develop because they didn't know to go pick the guy. That's what we want to see change. We want to see this team draft and develop. And so I think this offseason, you have to rely a lot more on that. And I'll tell you what, this is a great draft class. There are a lot of phenomenal players in this. It might be the best one that I've seen in a bit, probably since 2021 to be fair, because that was really an incredible class. But you're looking at the recent history, I am very confident this will go down as one of the better ones by a bit. So it's a great class to have draft picks in. It's one that you want to invest in. And I think with this roster right now, there are pieces that are probably the most valuable they've ever been. As controversial as it may be to move on from them, it's kind of potentially your last chance to get something out of these players, as far as if you want to go trade them. And so there's going to be some hard decisions made in this. But I think the Jaguars have to focus this offseason on cleansing the cap. They need to nail the draft. If you do those two things, I think this is still a very good football team in 2024. And I think they're much better than what they were this year. I don't think it takes a ton. I think you have some clear issues you want to resolve, some big ones that are not too difficult. And then you want to fill out the roster, right? Like you want to have good run blocking, for one. You want to have a two-dimensional offense. You want to have a second receiver that you can rely on consistently, not have him get injured. And obviously some of that changes if Christian Kirk's healthy, you keep Calvin Ridley. You got to find the right way of doing that. So I would move on from a lot of expensive contracts, and I would trade some pieces. And so with that all said, we're going to hop right into this thing. This is a look at where things are right now. I made this breakdown. This includes cap hits. It includes the average per year. It also includes, in category D here, prior pay against the cap. What this means is this is money that is going against the cap now and beyond. So that includes like 2025, 2026, that has been paid to the player already for previous work they've done. Say, signing bonus that was given out in 2023 that's now going against the books. That kind of thing. And when you look at the numbers and you compare them to what you compare them to, because cap hit compared to what the salary cap is without the rollover, right? So you're saving a little bit of money right now. Obviously, this is without a lot of players back on the team that you're considering. Average per year, you're well below right now too. But same thing there. A lot of work to be done. You have a lot of dead cap right now. You have a lot of money that's been pushed down the road. $164 million. Is that worse than the league? No, it's not. There's a lot of other teams that do this. But if you want to prepare for life, paying Trevor Lawrence $50 million a year, because that's really the only scenario where this team is probably competitive over the next decade or so, because they have not shown the ability to ever draft and develop a quarterback. Well, you got to be ready for it. You got to have the money available to extend your window of opportunity. And this is not how you do it. This is how you have a short window. This is how you have to move on from players. Or you just keep pushing it down the road until it just spirals out of control. So this is where we sit right now. There's work to be done. It's not the end of the world, but I think things need to be reset because you look at the competition and how well they're doing. I mean, these teams are best in the league right now as far as the roster and the cap situation for them. They're already competitive. They have tons of money to spend. They don't have a ton of players to worry about. Obviously, Indy's got Michael Pittman Jr. Still doesn't compare to what Jacksonville got, in my opinion, or what Jacksonville has. So this is just something to look at. And I'll show you 2024, 2025 as well, because I do want to show you what the next offseason would look like. That's important to consider in this. And that would be before re-signing players who would be free agents that year. But that's where we sit. So with that all said, I'm going to jump into the actual changes here. I'm going to try to go through them a little quick on some because we've already talked about them. They're kind of obvious. I want to hit on the controversial ones because there are some controversial ones in here. I'm not talking about Josh Allen, so don't worry about that. He's a Jaguar. That has to happen. But there's some other ones, though. So you got some of your free agent signings up here. You got your players you brought back. And below, you've got players that you cut and players you traded. Now, players I cut from this team. On offense, Zay Jones, the ceiling for him on this team is for him to be worth this contract. That's not good enough. You're setting the ceiling to average. That's just not an option. It's not a smart way to spend your money. We'll see what they do, but I would not keep him for that reason. I think you can do better. Brandon Scherf. I think he's an okay player. I don't think he's terrible. He can start for you, but you're paying him top 3 guard money. Something around there. You can't do that. And the amount of money you save, it's not this number here. It's not the 9 million. You're looking at the average per year, as long as none of it is guaranteed. And that's why you can't cut players like early in contracts, because some of that money is guaranteed. Usually on like the 3-year deals, they guarantee part of that second year so that the player is going to be with the team 2 years. So Brandon Scherf's, we look at the average per year, $16.5 million. Are you paying him that? No. And so when you cut him, you'll see the change up here in cap space. You save in both years because some of this money is pushed down the road. It's not guaranteed. It's pushed down the road. So there is a difference in that. So he's another player I'd cut. On defense, I think Fadakasi is a pretty clear one. You don't want to be paying interior defensive linemen who are average a lot of money. That's one of the worst things that you can do. Ideally, I think that's a position because it costs so much that you want to be paying the best of the best a lot of money because you're going to get your bang for your buck. But you don't pay average that much money because you can go out and you could draft average at worst and then go pay them, $1 million a year. You'll be looking a lot better than that. So he's another player I'd move on. And then Rayshawn Jenkins was a player I cut. You have Antonio Johnson sitting there available to start. He plays the same kind of snaps. That's what he did in college, at least. It's obvious. You save a lot of money cutting Rayshawn. You have to make the move. It's better for the team. And he can go look for somewhere else to start. And I think it's even an upgrade because Rayshawn, while he had the great plays back in 2022, he wasn't good in coverage this last year. He was questionable. And he is the perfect example of that. It's not about what you did for me before. It's about what you're going to do now because you're not paying him for 2022 anymore. You're paying him for 2024 if he sticks around. And he's not going to earn this in 2024. I just don't believe that. So he's the last one I cut. There's a few players I trade. There's actually 3. I know 2's shown here. There's another one over on the right I'll talk about. It's obvious if you go look over there because he's not on the roster. Cam Robinson's the first one. You're more so trading the rights to sign him more than anything else because no one's going to pay him $17.5 million. But if you cut him, a lot of teams that need tackles are going to have to compete against each other for him. The price is going to be driven up. And so teams that need tackle and want to make sure they get that, such as the New York Jets, and especially with Cam Robinson, who's a really good blocking tackle, I think you absolutely would consider doing a trade like that. So in this scenario, I had an early day 3 pick coming from the Jets. I sent a late day 3 pick back to them. That ended up being accepted. I did all these trades through PFF, and they were generally spot on with what I would see the value as. Because you're getting a good starter. You're just not getting someone who's worth this money. And you got Anton Harrison, who's out here saying he can play left tackle. He was phenomenal for you the first year. Get your bang for your buck. Go get that guy in the best situation for himself and let him be a franchise left tackle for this team and lock down one part of that offensive line for a long time. Now, the 2 harder ones. Darius Williams is the first of those. If you keep Darius Williams, is he worth this money? Absolutely. He's played phenomenal for this team. He's been really good. But the age where cornerbacks start to fall off is around 31 years old. By the time this team's ready to compete for a Super Bowl, Darius Williams is probably going to be on the decline. It's not anything personal against him. I like the guy a ton. I think he's phenomenal for Jacksonville. But by the time you're ready to compete, it's just history that these players start to play worse around then. You're also talking about a major scheme change. You're best off trading him now to a contender that has a need at cornerback, that wants an affordable player who's going to play really well for them to add to their roster. And there's 2 teams I think that are perfect for that to talk about. The 49ers have been the one I've been thinking about for a while because cornerback is the big need for them. You have Travarius Ward back there. You pair up Darius Williams with him next season. That's a great cornerback group. All of a sudden, San Francisco's really filled everything they need to. And they're still fine on cap space because they aren't spending a ton of money on Darius Williams. He's affordable. You're getting one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL, one of the best, I would say, for half the price of what the best are. So it's a phenomenal deal for the 49ers. And then the Lions are the other team I would consider because the Lions had a lot of secondary issues. So obviously, that's a team that's going to want to, really bear down on this year, try to make the Super Bowl, and this is an obvious move for them to make where they get an affordable player who's playing really well, and at the end of the day, maybe they let him walk after the season and they're able to get a comp pick because they don't have to go spend in free agency. So it's not terrible for them to go do something like that, to go send maybe a third-round pick. And so in this scenario, I did have him go to the 49ers out of those two teams. I think they're both possible. 49ers pick just lined up a little better. So we took 98 from them for Darius Williams. Pretty fair trade there. Now the final one's Calvin Ridley. I can't mark it on here because you can't put a franchise tag on and then trade him on here. It doesn't let you. But that would be the scenario. He'd be getting the tag and he'd be getting shopped. Because I'll tell you this. What Calvin Ridley's going to earn on his next deal is probably going to be more than $21 million a year. That is what the tag is. The Jaguars control whether he hits the market or not. Just like the Bengals are going to think with T. Higgins, who obviously much younger player, but why do you let him hit the market for free and not dictate the circumstances? Because teams will pay you a high pick to go get this kind of guy. I mean, we paid Atlanta what would have been a second-round pick if we keep him long-term to go get him when it was risky, when we didn't know what he'd be like when he came back. And it would have been a third even if he just was on the field and didn't do anything, just because he would have played enough snaps. So I think Calvin Ridley absolutely has that same value. And so you got to ask yourself, you believe he's going to be a better player this year, right? He probably is. You can't trade him next year because you franchise tag him 2 years in a row. You're going to be looking at paying him $27 million or so on the tag. He has to be incredible for a team to pay that to him because that is guaranteed money that he is earning for you to tag and trade him that year. This is really your last opportunity unless he's a 1,500-yard receiver or something, and you're probably keeping him in that scenario. But if you extend him now, he's going to turn 30 this year. He's going to want a long contract because he has not got to that second contract yet. He needs to earn a lot of money. The chances are he probably falls off during that deal. So I want to be proactive with this. You can get a high pick. You don't have to spend a bunch of money. You need to save up money for when you have to pay Trevor Lawrence a bunch. You want to extend your window. Take the chance. Go get a pick out of him and then go pick someone in the draft. Whether it's receiver or not, at some point, you are probably going to have a receiver available to you that is a really good deal, a really good player, and you're going to jump on him. And so you'll see if we did or not here in a second. I did this draft after doing these cap decisions, the free agency, all that. We just took one shot at it because that's how it works in real life. But that was the final kind of controversial move that I made. And I could understand if they go a different direction. Completely understand it. And you can see the players we brought back, the players we signed in free agency. A lot of these deals, very small deals. Most of them are 1 year. Daniel Thomas was a few years. I gave Ezra Cleveland a prove-it deal for $4.5 million. I think that's probably about where it lands. He could earn a lot more next season when he performs better in 2024. And I think he is going to perform better for whoever he plays for. And then Josh Allen, I gave him the long-term deal. Because not only does he deserve it, but it also allows you to tag Ridley and make sure that you get something out of him or you keep him. So it's just the logical way to go. So Josh Allen got his extension, $140 million over 5 years. And then up here, I brought in 5 players. I hit the needs I felt like absolutely had to be hit before the draft that you couldn't really survive without. I got a second receiver in Kendrick Bourne. Very affordable deal because he's suffered a lot of injuries. But when he's on the field, he is a good receiver. He will be an upgrade over Zay Jones as long as he is healthy. And I know he probably won't stay healthy. You can plan for that. So I very much like bringing him in, especially if you go make the playoffs and Kendrick Bourne is healthy at that time. That is a really good deal for them. On the offensive line, center was a position you can't live without. You have to do something there. Luke Fortner's not good enough. He is a massive liability. That is the kind of need that ends your team, as we saw this year. That is the perfect example of the one you have to fill in free agency. So I brought in Connor Williams. He's a great center for Miami. He did, I believe, tear his ACL this last year, which is why he's not getting a long-term deal. But he has still played very well, played a lot of snaps throughout his career, generally healthy other than that big injury, and I think one early in his career. So I like that deal for Jacksonville. Cameron Fleming brings us in a swing tackle. We have to get one. That's very vital. We've seen injuries happen with Walker Little before. Anton had a shoulder injury throughout the year. He did play the whole season. You have to be ready, though. You can't have Blake Hance starring again. And I didn't let him start because I didn't extend him. But defensive side of the ball, Marcus Davenport has worked with Ryan Nielsen before. Pretty productive for the New Orleans Saints. Went over to Minnesota after his fifth-year option. Got hurt early in the season. And he's going to earn less money because of that. Be the team that takes advantage, gets a good player that's undervalued, and go bring him in, have him be your backup pass rusher. That still gets a lot of snaps. You can find a place for him to play. Just bring that into your team. Get him on the field. Solve that problem for a couple years. It was a 2-year deal, $13 million. I think that takes care of it. And you're looking for interior defensive line. But that's something I looked for in the draft because I think spending in free agency on that is one of the most expensive things you can do. And so that would be an exception for me to filling every single need, especially because you got Devon Hamilton, who should be fully recovered this year too. I think that does help enough. And then Jeff Okudah, he can start free outside if he has to. He's also a high upside player, did much better with Atlanta last year. You pair him with the same DC again, give him another shot. This was a former 3rd overall pick. It is a high upside move. And I think at the bare minimum, he's worth about the value of this contract. So I think it's a good deal for that reason. It's one he probably accepts. So that is the salary cap situation after free agency. Now, as far as the draft, I've already done this draft. I did it first try. This is where we had a lot of extra picks, right? Because you move on from Calvin, you get a second. Cam Robinson gets you a 4th. You end up moving a later pick as well to secure that. I think it was an extra 6th rounder I moved. And then Darius Williams ends up getting you a 3rd. So a lot of extra draft capital to work with. Try to take advantage of that. So we'll take a look here at what we had. And you could kind of tell this was first try because we did miss out on some players I would have liked in the first round. Board didn't fall our way that well. But I still wanted to move back. There's a lot of talent here. Kool-Aid McKinstry may not be a personal favorite, but I think he's going to be a really good cornerback in the NFL. And he fits this scheme that they want to run very well. He's a press man corner. He can play physical. I really like that about him. You put him across from Tyson Campbell. Now you're looking at having your duo for the future, as long as Tyson can get back to form this year. Now, this was a trade down from 17. I moved pick 111 that we received for Cam Robinson. We also sent a pick with Cam Robinson as well. But I moved this to help get a 2nd rounder from the Eagles. Relatively fair trade. That's where their picks fell, and that was the best scenario we could do. I also really wanted to just pick in the 2nd round again because there's a lot of great players there, as you can see with the next 3 picks. Now, pick 45. You can see what we got from the New York Giants for Calvin Ridley. Pick 47. I moved up a couple spots from there. Used their 6th rounder because I saw a really good receiver on the board. Someone that, at the end of the day, I think is going to outperform where he's going to get picked. I think people are too low on him. I have him as a very early 2nd rounder right now in a loaded wide receiver class. I think Xavier Legette's a special player. Is he going to be a perfect prospect? No. We saw some struggles at the Senior Bowl early on. But you know what he did? He actually responded to them. And he played well after. There were players out there who didn't do that. That's a hard thing to do with all these people trash talking you. I mean, he had a terrible start to the week because he came in 6'1", instead of 6'3". You got all the Rashee Rice discourse brought up again, and I still think he performed pretty well. And you go look at what he's put on film, you go look at what people say about him that have been around him. This is a hardworking player who's tough. He brings physicality to a team that lacks it. He is going to be a starting receiver in the NFL, and I think be a really good one. So that's our replacement. That's who we get at receiver. Ends up being essentially the pick that we get for Calvin Ridley. Now, will he be a better receiver than Calvin Ridley in the long run? We'll see. I mean, I don't know about that. I can't say that definitively, right? But you're getting him on a rookie deal. You're getting him for much longer. He's locked up for you. And I think that's just a better situation for this team to develop at a position that they have not developed at for a long time, because they really have not at receiver. And then we got Kingsley Suamataia at 48. This is a high upside tackle that I think proved at the Senior Bowl the floor may not be as low as we think. He looked like a better player at the Senior Bowl than what he was on film. And on film, he still flashes a lot. It's just questions of consistency. He has the strength, he has the speed to do it all. He could be a very special player in the NFL, but I think it comes down to a team allowing him to develop. And you have a really good situation here because in this scenario, you have Walker Little and you have Cameron Fleming at right tackle. There is no rush for Kingsley to have to go in and start, like week 1. He does not have to do that. So you develop him. You probably get him out there at some point the first year when he is ready. And I think you get a really good right tackle. And you could also consider, if you need to, starting him at right guard. That's another option. So I really like that pick for the Jaguars. Chop Robinson at 54. This was just an example of getting the best player on the board. Someone's going to fall. It was Chop Robinson in this scenario, which I can get. There's some reasons for concern, especially that a lot of his production did come against tackles who graded out pretty poor this season. But there's still some very special things about Chop Robinson. I mean, he is as explosive as it gets off the line of scrimmage. If you can get him into a situation where he can develop behind really good pass rushers, which I think you have at least one in Josh Allen and one that's rising in Trayvon Walker, you also add Marcus Davenport to that room. You have a good group of guys for Chop Robinson to be around, to improve his game, and to be something for this team. Then third round. This is one of our biggest trade-ups. Actually, it is our biggest trade-up of the whole draft. I moved up to 83 because I saw Leonard Taylor was here. I have a second-round grade on him. It's a clear need for the team. He's the best player on the board. I think Cooper Beebe was pretty close, but we got him as well. Leonard Taylor, really good defensive interior lineman. Not consistent right now, but the flashes are incredible. He has everything he needs to be really good in the NFL. I think this is a great situation for him to come into with what is now a very loaded defensive line for the Jaguars. So high upside prospect with a lot to show, a lot to prove. I think he's a good pick. And then Cooper Beebe. You fill that last potential need on the offensive line. Get yourself a really good right guard or left guard. You can play either one of those. You bring him in, make the transition, and this guy's just going to be a good starter for you. That's what he's been throughout college his entire career. Just a consistently good player. And unfortunately, because people want to see all this flashy stuff, they want to see you do something crazy that no one else can do, just because Cooper Beebe is good at everything, he's not a first-round prospect or even maybe a second-round prospect because of that, which is obnoxious. And that's why we made the pick and why we traded up for him as well. You can see here the capital we got for Williams, Cam Robinson. Mentioned it earlier, but you can see the trades, not forced or anything. This is what they were graded at, and I think they're absolutely trades that would be accepted. Javon Baker at 114. That was our last fourth rounder. We moved on from two of them. We used one for moving up with the Eagles, and then we used moving back with the Eagles, and then we got their second. We used the other to move up to 83, which I think was very much worth it because we got a player worth a lot more in the 83rd pick. But our last fourth rounder, I went with Javon Baker. He's kind of come out of nowhere the last few weeks, even though he should have been on big boards. He proved it during college. He's just a very good player for his size. Really tall guy. can go down the field, vertically challenge the defense, something that Jacksonville needs to add. Really like the value there. Then AJ Barter, is this a need? No, absolutely not. Was it the best player on the board? I think it might have been. It's close between him and Ben Sinnott, but these were the guys that were really options at that point. Some of the other players I would have went with weren't there, don't really have the capital to move around either. We did that for our other guys. So I went ahead and picked AJ Barter. And then Sebastian Castro for the final pick. Honestly, I have not watched anything on him yet, but he grades out really well, played a lot in the slot. From what I know, he would be a good fit, but this is your, sixth rounder. You're just going to try to take a shot on something. So that's our last pick here. And this is with the updated mock draft sim as well. So these are new ratings. That's why we didn't get like Darius Robinson, because he went, I think, at the end of the first, early of the second. But this is kind of where players fall now. We took advantage of what we could. We moved around where we needed to. We're not afraid to do that because teams do that in the draft. You may see a lot of trades here. That is realistic. That is the way it's worked. So, nevertheless, let's take a look at how things look now. So, with a lot of players to re-sign, a lot of needs, and players you had to move on from, compare this scenario. You have a little more cap space as far as your average per year. Keep in mind, this is with draft picks. This other one is without the draft picks, so you have 42 players. You do actually end up saving a little bit as far as your average per year in this scenario. You move on from some hard contracts, you award the big ones where you need to, and you look as well at the pay against the cap, prior pay against the cap, money that is essentially dead to this team, goes down a little bit. But most importantly, you set yourself up for 2025, where you're in a much better position. So 2025, let's take a look at that. Now this is without anyone re-signed, right? Now, something I want to note first and foremost, you see Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, and Blue here. These are their fifth-year options. These are their projections for them. I pulled them off over the cap. They have 4 different categories that they apparently go by. And so Trevor Lawrence, he falls in the playtime category because he has played 75% or greater percentage of snaps. So, I mean, that makes sense, obviously. And you even see down here, you could also play 50% or greater over all 3 seasons. For Travis Etienne, he falls in the basic, unfortunately, because of that big injury in 2021. So it's going to be a really cheap deal from what it looks like for Travis Etienne. Neither of these players as well were on the original ballot for the Pro Bowl. That's why Trevor Lawrence is not here, because he was an alternate. The only Pro Bowler we've had in the last 2 years was Josh Allen and Ross Matisic. So you kind of benefit from it because you're talking about $10 million less dollars in this scenario. And then, obviously Travis Etienne not earning as much because of that injury. So these are the numbers that you end up getting for that. Now, looking at the average per year, significantly lower here. We would have $120 million here that we're saving each year. Now, that's going to drastically change, right? But going through the numbers, going through the players, it's roughly like 80 million, I think, at most, if you brought back everyone on the high end for what you would add on to this. So you're still saving quite a bit of money in the first season of these players being expensive. Trevor Lawrence specifically. And it's going to get a lot worse than that. But you're saving a lot of money there. You look at your cap hit, you have $100 million available in this scenario. And I think most importantly to consider here is your prior pay against the cap, the money that is pushed down the road in this scenario that the player has already earned. You've already given it to them, but it's not against the cap yet. Down to $78 million. Starting scenario, $164 million. So the goal of this is we find starters in the draft, find great players there. You build your team through that. You fix the cap space, you reset, you're still competitive, and now you go into that next offseason, and this is, by the way, like already after the 5th-year options, you have this much money available. you have the best situation of every team in the AFC South, most likely, heading into that offseason. And you're finally catching up on your disadvantages because those teams have 2 more years of rookie contract from their quarterbacks. You have to find a way to catch up. And you catch up by drafting well. You catch up by having plenty of draft capital to do that with as well. And so that's why I personally, right now, support doing a semi-rebuild of this team, resetting some things. You have your core, build around that, and build around it smart. Don't go spend a ton in free agency when you don't have to. Do it the right way. So that's what I've got for you guys. I will put a link out to this in the description so you guys can check out all these numbers. I'm sure there are some mistakes. They're generally really close, though, as far as what they should be. So that's all I've got, guys. It was a fun one to make for you. I am, even though I don't have high expectations, I am excited to see what happens this offseason because there will be some change in this organization. There are going to be different players on this team. And I think in the long run that we're going to see changes as well, whether this year or not. So I appreciate y'all watching, taking your time to be here. That's all I've got, though. So finally, with that all said, go Jags.